Lately, I think many of us have been grappling with the question of how to beat barbarism without becoming barbaric. I have not been finding answers among my peers, and so I decided to do something insane and start reading. So in this video, I'm going to be reading and commenting on George Orwell's Politics and the English Language. And I need you to remember that this was written in 1946, because some of the stuff he says, my head just about exploded. I was like, what? We've been saying these things for 80 years now? Anyway, this is why it's delightful to read the classics, I guess. Most people who bother with the matter at all would admit that the English language is in a bad way, but it is generally assumed that we cannot by conscious action do anything about it. Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light or hansom cabs to airplanes. Underneath this lies the half-conscious belief that language is a natural growth and not an instrument which we shape for our own purposes. Okay, so this feels like it could be written today, except for the small detail that this last sentence, this idea that language could be an instrument which we shape for our own purposes, has been completely thrown out. I don't think I've ever heard anybody make this argument. People are constantly getting into arguments online about the definitions of things, as if the definitions matter. And it sounds like Orwell is proposing that actually it does kind of matter. I mean, I had taken for granted that language is a tool for communication, and if your language isn't communicating what you want it to, you need to pick new language. And I think that this is true, but underrated is the idea which it sounds like he's going for, which is that, like, sometimes language doesn't evolve naturally. Sometimes people manipulate language for political or ideological ends. And it is possible to resist this. And it seems like, yeah, this does feel relevant to the whole idea of, like, how do you respond to barbarism with civility? Or how do you respond to defection if you want a society that cooperates? It is clear that the decline of language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer, but an effect can become a cause, reinforcing the original cause and producing the same effect in an intensified form, and so on, indefinitely. A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure, and then fail all the more completely because he drinks. It is rather the same thing that is happening to the English language. It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish. But the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. Yeah, it's very interesting to me that I've basically, I don't know, been taking it for granted that you have to use the language that you're given, because how else are you supposed to communicate with people, even if that language has been warped beyond all meaning. Recently, I actually have, I've been trying to get back to my autism, if that makes sense, trying to get back to my roots. At least when words very clearly imply something that they don't mean, I've been trying to aggressively refuse to use those words in favor of words that are more accurate and don't actually break down communication, except insofar as they might upset people into refusing to listen to me, which I think I don't mind so much at this point. I did definitely go through a phase where I felt like it's very important for me to be charitable to other people, and I should expect them to be charitable towards me, but I have since learned that you can't make people be charitable to you, and so while I'll still try to be charitable to people, I'm not going to twist myself into pretzels to use language that is misleading, because they're mostly going to do it anyway. They'll find a reason if they don't want to engage with your argument. The point is that the process is reversible. If one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly, and to think clearly is a necessary first step toward political regeneration. Meanwhile, here are 5 specimens of the English language as it is now habitually written. They're a little below the average, but are fairly representative examples. I can't really tell the extent to which these quotes are just incomprehensible to me because they're a bit archaic, or because they're just gibberish. It sounds like Orwell is complaining about them being gibberish. I am not indeed sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed— oh my god. The thing that this immediately brings to mind is actually not the sort of euphemisms and political, like, newspeak that I was sort of expecting him to address. It feels more like the postmodernist writers, where you're like, it's possible that I'm just too dumb to understand these concepts, but it feels as though they're written, I don't know, to create the illusion of intellect. I list below, with notes and examples, various of the tricks by means of which the work of prose construction is habitually dodged. So the first thing he complains about are dying metaphors, where it's like the new metaphors actually evoke a visual image, and so that's useful. The dead metaphors, he thinks, have basically just become normal speech, and so you don't even notice them. But the ones that are in the in-between stage, he thinks are a problem. He also complains about metaphors that have just been twisted out of their original meaning, as he puts it, whether people have like misspelled toe in toe in the line, which is a completely different thing. Okay, so his second problem. Operators or verbal false limbs. It sounds like he's just complaining about people being wordy or hedging too much. He describes it as like padding. Basically, it's like language that isn't as straightforward and succinct as it could be. Characteristic phrases are render inoperative, militate against, exhibit a tendency to. Pretentious diction is another one on the list. Words like phenomenon, promote, constitute, exhibit, exploit, utilize, eliminate, liquidate are used to dress up simple statements and give an air of scientific impartiality to biased judgments. Adjectives like epoch-making, epoch-making? How do you say that? Epoch? I am absolutely horrified to report that the American pronunciation is epoch? Epoch? Not to be confused with epic? Apparently, epoch and epoch are both British pronunciations. I'm gonna keep saying epoch. Foreign words and expressions such as cul-de-sac. Oh god. Ancien régime. Deus ex machina. Mutatis mutandis. Gleichschaltung are used to give an air of culture and elegance. He basically thinks you should be using simpler words, and Anglo-Saxon words tend to be simpler, or at least that people like to pick Latin or Greek words, or foreign words even. Latin and Greek are foreign, but you know what, like Latin and Greek root words, or words that are just outright foreign, phrases that are outright foreign, because it makes them sound smart or interesting, and he thinks you should just stick to the Anglo-Saxon most of the time, which, fair enough. The next one on the list, meaningless words. In certain kinds of writing, particularly in art criticism and literary criticism, it is normal to come across long passages which are almost completely lacking in meaning. That hasn't changed. When one critic writes, the outstanding feature of Mr. X's work is its living quality, while another writes, the immediately striking thing about Mr. X's work is its peculiar deadness. The reader accepts this as a simple difference of opinion. If words like black and white were involved instead of the jargon words dead and living, he would see at once that language was being used in an improper way. Many political words are similarly abused. The word fascism has now no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. Holy crap, this was written in 1946! 1946 and fascism already only meant something not desirable? The words democracy, socialism, freedom, patriotic, realistic, justice have each of them several different meanings which cannot be reconciled with one another. In the case of a word like democracy, not only is there no agreed definition, but the attempt to make one is resisted from all sides. It is almost universally felt that when we call a country democratic, we are praising it. Consequently, the defenders of every kind of regime claim that it is a democracy, and fear that they might have to stop using that word if it were tied down to any one meaning. Words of this kind are often used in a consciously dishonest way. That is, the person who uses them has his own private definition, but allows his hearer to think he means something quite different. Other words used in variable meanings, in most cases more or less dishonestly, are class, totalitarian, science, progressive, reactionary, bourgeois, equality. Interesting, the way we talk about these things, it feels like it's just a recent problem, like in the last, 15 to 30 years, but apparently we're going on like, 80 years? It's been a while. As I have tried to show, modern writing at its worst does not consist in picking out words for the sake of their meaning and inventing images in order to make the meaning clearer. It consists in gumming together long strips of words which have already been set in order by someone else and making the results presentable by sheer humbug. The attraction of this way of writing is that it is easy. It is easier, even quicker, once you have the habit, to say, in my opinion, it is not an unjustifiable assumption, than to say, I think. By using stale metaphors, similes, and idioms, you save much mental effort at the cost of leaving your meaning vague, not only for your reader, but for yourself. Honestly, yeah, one of the things that I've heard people talk about when it comes to just like criticizing prose is this idea that like you should be coming up with new turns of phrase or something like this as opposed to using hackneyed ones. And I've always kind of thought, like, why? Like, if it sounds good, surely that's fine. If it sounds good and communicates the thing, like if it has the right rhythm and communicates what you're trying to say, then why does it have to be like, what's so important about the like original turns of phrase? But I kind of understand what he means here. I mean, essentially, I guess what he's getting at is that it's sort of just lazy thinking. Essentially, you're not thinking as much when you're just sort of like saying the first thing that comes to mind in this sense. I don't know. A scrupulous writer, in every sentence that he writes, will ask himself at least 4 questions thus. What am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect? And he'll probably ask himself 2 more. Could I put it more shortly? Have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? But you're not obliged to go to all this trouble. You can shirk it by simply throwing your mind open and letting the ready-made phrases come crowding in. They will construct your sentences for you, even think your thoughts for you to a certain extent, and at need they will perform the important service of partially concealing your meaning, even from yourself. It is at this point that the special connection between politics and the debasement of language becomes clear. I believe that when you're looking at people who are not good thinkers, or who are ideologically captured, that they're more likely to use talking points, or like things like this, right? Like anytime you watch a presidential debate, or really any kind of political debate, you just sort of see people ignore the question and then recite in really particular phrases exactly whatever it is that the party line is. Similarly, news outlets do this all the time. You've got like the journalists all talking to each other. Somebody somehow sends out a memo and then like every single headline uses the same phrases, or every single tweet from all these people uses the same phrases. And sometimes you come across a phrase that just explains the thing perfectly, and why should you go to the trouble of coming up with another way to explain the thing perfectly? I think there might be some clear distinction here that I'm just not grasping. In our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan, can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face, and which do not square with the professed aims of political parties. I don't actually know if there's a consensus on dropping the atom bombs on Japan, but I think most people I know and speak to about these types of topics are like, look, nobody's happy about it, but it saved a lot of lives. Like, I mean, you can argue about it. I do think it's probably true that you don't, if you want votes, or if you want, like, the ordinary person to be comfortable, you either have to, like, propagandize them to the point that they can just trivially say, like, yeah, it's good that we dropped the bombs, or you have to put it more gently to them, or, like, talk around it. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were instinctively, to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. In our age, there is no such thing as keeping out of politics. Oh shit, what? What? I swear to God, on the rare occasions that I turn to the classics, every time I'm like, oh, nothing has ever been different ever. People have been exactly the same forever. I realize like 80 years ago is not that long ago, but also like, how is this a thing that was said in 1946? In our age, there's no such thing as keeping out of politics. All issues are political issues, and politics itself is a mass of lies, evasions, folly, hatred, and schizophrenia. I think there is a problem with, like, direct speech sounds great, but the problem is that, like, it's not sufficient to make you honest and thoughtful, because, like, frame matters too. There's ways that you can very directly describe the same phenomenon while still obscuring aspects of it, right? You can, like, cherry pick examples, but similarly you can cherry pick which angles of a scene you want to describe. I suppose my claim would be better with an example, but I do not feel up to conjuring one right now. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll talk about this in another video, though. This could be an interesting topic. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought, I think is a very good notion that he has. I don't feel he really defends it, at least not here. What is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word, and not the other way about. In prose, the worst thing one can do with words is to surrender them. When you think of a concrete object, you think wordlessly, and then if you want to describe the thing you've been visualizing, you probably hunt about till you find the exact words that seem to fit it. When you think of something abstract, you are more inclined to use words from the start, and unless you make a conscious effort to prevent it, the existing dialect will come rushing in and do the job for you, at the expense of blurring or even changing your meaning. That feels like the most actionable bit of the essay. I kind of was struggling to imagine, like, how do you actually avoid the failure mode that he's complaining about? And this sort of makes sense to me. Like, try to picture things, essentially try to be as concrete as possible. Even when you're trying to describe something abstract, look for a concrete way to describe it. And I think that he's right that this is a good idea, just because abstraction makes it really easy to use a term using your own internal definition of the word while understanding that the person you're talking to is going to pick up a different meaning. It seems like it makes it harder to equivocate. Is that the right word? I feel like I'm having this problem. Like, there's a lot of words that just come to mind, and I'm not even certain that I know what they mean. Like, if you asked me to define them, would I actually be able to? Sometimes I just don't know a better word for it, though. Probably it is better to put off using words as long as possible and get one's meanings as clear as one can through pictures and sensations. Afterward, one can choose, not simply accept, the phrases that will best cover the meaning, and then switch round and decide what impression one's words are likely to make on another person. But one can often be in doubt about the effect of a word or a phrase, and one needs rules that one can rely on when instinct fails. I think the following rules will cover most cases. Number 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you're used to seeing in print. Number 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Number 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Number 4. Never use the passive where you can use the active. I wonder, did he come up with these? Is this why we learned some of these rules in English classes? Number 5. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Number 6. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. Maybe he means barbarous in like butchery of the English language somehow. These rules sound elementary, and so they are, but they demand a deep change of attitude in anyone who has grown used to writing in the style now fashionable. I have not here been considering the literary use of language, but merely language as an instrument for expressing and not for concealing or preventing thought. Oh, okay, so that's a useful clarification, because I feel like some of the stuff it's nicer to use flowery language and, literary prose for rhythm purposes. Stuart Chase and others have come near to claiming that all abstract words are meaningless, and have used this as a pretext for advocating a kind of political quietism. Since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism? One need not swallow such absurdities as this, but one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. I can't easily map this onto, theories or schools of thought that I'm familiar with. Other than this just sounds like standard sort of Redditor sophistry, is that the right word for it? Just sort of putting the burden of thought on the listener rather than communicating anything yourself. That's what it sounds like Stuart Chase is doing with the "since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism" thing. The technically correct, but pedantic and not actually communicating anything worth communicating kind of thing. I believe in the modern era we call this midwittery. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself. Political language, and with variations, this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. One cannot change this all in a moment, but one can at least change one's own habits. All right, that was interesting. That did not go the direction I thought it was going to go. I feel like the key takeaways here are something like language informs thought, so you should be cautious with your language. You should try to say what you mean. The simplest way to make sure that you are thinking clearly while communicating to other people is to try to simplify your language so that it can't be misconstrued, and to start with imagery and sensations and try to faithfully describe in concrete terms concrete phenomena. I think that was one of the words he had a problem with, right? Concrete things, rather than resorting to the abstract, or rather than leaping immediately to the abstract, where it's easy to muddy your thoughts. Oh, and Claude said that the value of this Orwell piece would be that it primes the linguistic corruption frame. Read everything else with this in your hand. If you have suggestions for this series, please let me know. I feel like I got something out of that. Hopefully you did too. See you later.